Hi, everyone. I'm Gold Derby News and Features Editor Ray Richmond, and I'm here today with Brent Miller, President of Production and Development for Norman Lear's Act 3 Productions and Executive Producer of the Emmy nominated ABC special Norman Lear 100 Years of Music and Laughter. Brent, as we meet this morning, Norman is precisely 1 week away from his 101st birthday. Unbelievable. The man is clearly ageless and immortal. He's going to outlive us all. Before we get to discussing the special, tell the story, if you would, of how you met and became production partners.
Um, well, it's ironic that you asked that question because it's a full circle moment because we met when I was planning his 85th birthday, almost 17 years ago. At the time, I was freelancing with various event planners around town, and I sort of became known as the go-to guy for anything destination outside of Los Angeles. And there was a woman, Sharon Sachs Productions, who had asked me on a Friday if I would commit to her for the next 6 months. And I said no on a Friday because I really enjoyed the freelance lifestyle. And then I decided Sunday night when I was sitting at home, I felt guilty and I called her at home and I said, Sharon, you need me for next 6 months. You've got me. Let's do this. And Monday morning, he called Sharon and he said, Sharon, I'm turning 85. My wife's turning 60. We want to do a party, 145 years of the Lears. We're going to do a party in LA and we're going to do a party in Mallorca, Spain. And I need you to hire someone to work just with me. And she said, I think I have the perfect person. And Tuesday morning, we met in his office and we've been together ever since.
Wow. So, what's it like being around the man who's undoubtedly the most beloved and respected producer of television who ever lived? I mean, what is working so closely for 17 years with a living legend? What's that taught you?
Oh my God, I don't know how much time we have here. I think what has been most important for me is less about the business and more so about life. I think from a business standpoint, you can figure it out. There's no real manual in entertainment, as we all know. But from if I think about a relationship in his mentoring me, it's more about a life manual that I have access to on a daily basis, and someone who's lived 100 years of a life well lived. I mean, I don't take that for granted.
Let's talk about Norman Lear, 100 Years of Music and Laughter, nominated in the Outstanding Variety Special Pre-Recorded category. How long, Brent, was that in the works, and how did that come together? Was it? I imagine it had to be at least a year of planning.
Well, we had already established a relationship with ABC, who have been very great to us on our live in front of a studio audience specials that we do with Jimmy Kimmel and Kerry Washington and all kinds of friends. So I had approached them, and as opposed to doing another live special last year, I said, look, this is Norman's 100th, and I'd love nothing more than to do a special, but one that is really honoring him and a life well lived. And so, they were gracious enough to greenlight it, and I brought on Done and Dusted, who we have always been trying to do something together, and this ended up being the perfect project to work on together. David Jammy specifically worked hand in hand with myself and others to really craft something that wasn't just a love letter, but also a little bit of historical knowledge on that life well lived, which was why we filmed it in two separate nights. The round table that Jimmy Kimmel was hosting for us was intentionally planned so that we could weave that into the night of the show and really give people context of his life. So it wasn't just about a variety show of performances and clips from shows, and we didn't want it to be a clip show. But how do we fold that in an interesting and entertaining way that felt relevant and meaningful to the times that we were living?
Yeah, I was going to say I watched it last night on Hulu, and you know, splitting this between the party event and the roundtable with Jimmy and Octavia Spencer and Jennifer Aniston and Amy Poehler. Really effective format, I think. It wasn't just the usual parade of celebrities reading platitudes off a teleprompter, which these party things too often are. I mean, and you obviously were guarding against that.
Yes, and that's what I loved so much about that particular evening that we pre-shot, just because when you're in the room and all of those people in the room, they had a great time, and at the end of the night they didn't realize that we were going to be cutting in this other part of the story. So when you see the final broadcast, it was people who were in the room were really blown away by how we layered it up, I guess is the lack of a better phrase, but really tried to make it more than just a live night birthday party that everyone was invited to.
It wasn't entirely clear what was Jennifer Aniston's connection to Norman. I know that she was on the round table. Was she
Jennifer,
just a fan?
well, they all were. I mean, Norman hasn't done a show with Amy or Octavia or
That's
Jennifer.
true.
But it was just how do we put together a group of people who are genuinely interested in Norman's life, and who also have in a sense stood on his shoulders to get where they are today. And I think that what Norman's shows did is, when you watch the special, for all of those people and what they talked about and how much it meant to them. And they were all kids when his shows were on, but they were kids that were interested in something very something bigger than probably what they thought they would ever become. And having Norman as that influence without them realizing it, we felt was a meaningful way and an impactful way to bring everybody together to have a round table that didn't feel scripted.
Yeah, and it's true. None of them actually worked with him per se from the round table, but they all had curiosity and they were all just honored to be there. It was inspiring to see what a titan of diversity in his shows Norman has always been. I mean, a lot of people pay lip service to diversity, but this guy really walked that walk. Obviously, going back all the way to hits in the '70s, All in the Family, One Day at a Time, Sanford and Son, Good Times, Facts of Life, then the Jeffersons later on. You don't realize just exactly the chance. So, I mean, we all know he's a legend because of the chances he took, but I don't think I realized that he threatened to walk probably dozens of times.
Yeah, I've heard those stories and I've read them in his book, and I think he articulates those experiences quite well. It's a different time now, but would he still walk if he felt passionate about something? I absolutely think so. He still has that fire in his belly that is probably helped him get to the age of almost 101.
How much hands-on input did he have in planning this, or did he just leave it to you and the other producers and just go along for the ride?
Zero. And it was really it felt I was so happy that he was able to just kind of take a back seat on this and as you said, go along for the ride. He had no idea as to who was involved, who would be speaking, who would be performing, how the night was structured. I just really wanted him to feel celebrated, and thankfully he trusted that we would make that happen. And that's hard for a producer, especially someone like him who's always been hands-on on everything he does. And in this case, he was the subject that we could all celebrate.
Yeah, and oh my God, there were some just amazing moments in this special. I'm thinking, in particular of Tom Hanks going over Norman's flying bombing missions over Nazi Germany during World War II. I had no idea he was such a badass, and I'll bet most other people watching this didn't know that either.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to put that in, because Norman is probably one of the oldest living combat veterans that are still with us. And he flew 52 missions, dropped bombs 35 times, and that's a story worth telling. As you said, most people don't think of him in that way. They think of him as the producer, the writer, but not as the veteran.
I think I remember people. Do you remember this, Brent, where people were speaking about Fred Rogers being a Green Beret and all this stuff? Just because I think it was so counterproductive to to the man he became. And I would imagine that people were, if they ever heard this and wasn't Tom Hanks describing it, would have thought, oh, that's got to be bull. How could this little guy in a fedora be talking be this World War II bombing hero? But it was really, when you hear Tom Hanks telling the story, no one could tell it like him. No one does World War II like Hanks. So it
Yeah.
was just so powerful.
And thankfully, Tom was gracious enough to be a part of it, because that was a very specific role that needed someone like a Tom to come on board and deliver that, for all the reasons you just mentioned.
And some unexpected things in this show too. I don't think I expected to see Tony Danza singing. Um, and so great to see Meathead himself, Rob Reiner and Rita Moreno and George Clooney. People like Clooney obviously just wanted to be there because they love Norman so much, not because they necessarily have any history at all.
Well, actually, Clooney and Norman do have history, because Norman, I think, is responsible for giving him his first job as an actor, which I believe was on Facts of Life, if I'm not mistaken. And
Oh
then,
yeah, that's right. I think I knew that. That's right.
yeah. And then what people don't always remember is there was a half-hour comedy called ER that Norman did in the 80s. And George was the star of that half-hour comedy prior to getting the drama of ER all those years later.
Is that true? He was on both ERs?
Yes, it is very true. And so George and Norman go way back. And of course, they share, from a political and philanthropic side of things. They're like cut from the same cloth.
In all your opportunities to speak with Norman, Brent, uh, do you know what, do all of his children per se, are they all equal in his eyes in terms of his shows? Or, does he have a special soft spot, obviously, for something like All in the Family? I mean, and even though knowing that Norman isn't someone that goes down memory lane all the time, he's always talking about over next. But if he does get nostalgic, have you ever sat down and had a conversation with him about the things that really did mean the most to him?
Yeah, we've had many of those conversations, and without speaking for him, I think there are certain things that he thinks about depending on the times we're living, and he really tries to focus on living in the moment, I should say. And so, there at times it was, B. Arthur and Maude, that was his favorite character. He's often talked about Edith being his favorite character as well. The special he did in, I think it was 1981, in the LA Sports Arena, called I Love Liberty. He's deeply in love with that show. He feels it's one of the shows that one of his most proudest producing moments was that show. He loves Mary Hartman. Mary Hartman. I mean, it's really good times. I mean, you could go on and on. The shows in the 70s he was much more hands-on with than the shows in the 80s. Because if you watch his documentary or read his book, you'll see that he stepped down in a sense so he could focus on People for the American Way and in his fight for, well, quite simply, it was to get not to mix politics and religion, and that's what he felt most passionate about during that time period.
But I didn't know about that either, that he literally put his career on hold for a few years and is traveling with the Constitution, you
The
know,
Declaration of Independence.
or the Declaration of Independence. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like,
That was
wow.
that was he and his wife. They fell in love with the idea that this was America's birth certificate and it should travel to the people. They shouldn't have to travel to it. So he set out a campaign when they purchased that to make it go to all 50 states. And when I started working with him after the birthday, the 85th birthday, that was my first gig as I was traveling to the last 7 states before ultimately he sold the document and with the hope of replenishing his foundation. But he hit all 50 states with that document.
If there was anything missing, I think from the special, Brent, it might have been there wasn't a lot of talk about his own personal family life, with wives and children and such. And I know he has been a family man. That was obviously by design.
Which is why we had his entire family sitting with him. The 6 kids and the grandkids were just off to the side as well. But if we would have had more time, of course we could have added that into the mix. But when you're doing a TV show on primetime television, some of those moments we can't always share.
And he doesn't really talk about them a lot, which, he keeps his personal life personal, which I respect a lot, because I'm sure he must have gotten being this lion of the left. He must have gotten threats and such over the years. And, not a lot of that was discussed, but the fact that he's been so courageous and bold and face down, I'm sure that kind of stuff without fear had to also have been a big part of who he is.
Absolutely, and he does talk about that in his book as well, and we've mentioned it in the documentary, Norman Lear, Just Another Version of You. But in the later years, I mean, he often talks about the reason his phone will ring when he's on a panel is because he's told all 6 kids he's available for whenever they want him, and he will answer that phone whenever they call. He's got five daughters and 1 son, and they range in ages from, gosh, don't quote me, the twins, I think they're in their late 20s, but I know his oldest is in her 70s. So it's quite the
Oh my God, he's got child in their 70s. Jesus.
yes, he
I
does.
guess, yeah, when you think about it, yes, well, of course, the man is going to be 101. That would make sense.
Yeah. I think that
But
the bigger shock is when when he says he has kids in their 20s.
that would, yeah, that too. Just you usually don't find people that have an age range of a half century between their children.
Right.
Wow. Um, uh, what was Norman's response to the evening after it was over, Brent? I mean, I know he said, holy shit, or holy bleep in his short onstage speech. How blown away was he after all this?
Well, we actually had to edit it because he was quite blown away, and he was at a loss for words, which Norman usually isn't. I think it was just an emotional evening for multiple reasons. I mean, I think he felt really celebrated, and he got to see faces he hadn't seen in a long time. Obviously, from the other shows, people that were there, everyone from Marla Gibbs to the ladies from Facts of Life, and even well, there's a handful of people, as you said. Tony Danza singing was a great moment for him, and Tony's got a beautiful voice. I mean, he nailed it with that song.
He does, surprise shockingly. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know Tony. I know Kristen Bell could sing, but I didn't know Tony Danza could sing.
Yeah, he's got a one-man show that he does that I saw in New York. That's really terrific. I mean, and he brings in the audience, and I mean, it's obviously an intimate crowd, but he does a very good job with bringing in an audience and making them all feel a part of his family that night.
Does Norman still wake up every day with the same energy and optimism, Brent, or do you sense he's, as he goes into his hundreds, finally, is ready to maybe lay down in a hammock and start sipping Mai Tais?
I wish I could say it's the latter, and it's just not. There's not a day that he doesn't wake up thinking about our country, where we are, thinking about his grandkids, thinking about what he can do and how he can, quote, be used to help people, to help others, to make a difference. I mean, he's so amazing in that his brain never stops thinking about others and what his platform, his influence, what he's done, and how that can be helpful to other people who may need it.
Well, he's still clearly all there in terms of his mind, and almost too good to be true in terms of the kind of human being he is. But it's so inspiring. Um, with that, I think we're out of time. Brent Miller, best of luck at the Emmys.
Thank you.
Hopefully in September, barring postponement. And thanks for joining us today at Gold Derby.
Thank you so much for having me.